HCR is 22, Representative Edmonds, adopt a joint rule of the Senate and the House to establish the Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee, monitor, review, make recommendations relative to all aspects of the state Medicaid program.
Representative Edmonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members. We'd be able to adopt Joint Rule 11, which would be able to form the Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee. Would be 3 members of Health and Welfare, 3 members of Appropriations, 3 members from Senate Finance, 3 members from Senate Health and Welfare, and we'd be able to operate as the Joint Oversight Committee.
For a question, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You went through who is supposed to be on this committee. Who makes those appointments?
Would be the Speaker on our side and the President on the Senate side. I think it'd be identical to Joint Budget on Legislative Committee on the Budget.
So, why do you feel there's a need for this, Representative Edmonds?
Well, I think, Representative Smith, I think you recognize, even in your tender, I think how much this is growing nationally. Not a bad thing, not a good thing, just is. And I think we're spending so much time in appropriations and others of trying to deal with this. I think this really gives us, and I think years ago, if it had been, this would already be in place. I think we are responding to what's going on nationally with folks like CMS and others that, in fact, I had a letter from the United States Government Accountability Office, and they're really asking states to step up when it comes to the oversight of Medicaid. So I think this is something other states are looking at and doing, and I think we're just in line with where all of the health care is going, and just gives us an opportunity to, as another instrument, to do a better job.
But no directions from them on how they're asking for that oversight. So what you're doing is putting in another layer of bureaucracy in the Medicaid program, and what authority would this group have?
Well, I think when it comes down to we're spending now with federal money and what we're doing statewide, we're at $15 billion and growing. And I would just say I agree with you. We don't necessarily want to always add bureaucracy, but when this is the largest thing that we do almost in state government, or at least one of the top 2 or 3. I mean, I think this deserves a good level of scrutiny and oversight. I think we can do our jobs better. That's my only point.
But what's the authority? What is just to listen to things, make recommendations? They have no vote to do anything. Is that correct?
They would be a committee that would be set up to hear this agency all the things that happen in Medicaid. So we would require those things that we would be the voice for our legislature to go through all aspects of Medicaid. And so true oversight.
You would be the voice for the legislature.
I think exactly what we do in joint budget, Representative Smith, that we oversee all types of budgets, and issues in the budget. It's just the process of doing good government. I think this is a good government bill. I think this is another tool. I think if we would have looked at this 25 years ago when the need wasn't as obvious, as large as it is now, I think we would have already done that. I think you'll see states everywhere doing exactly what we're recommending.
Well, I think 25 years ago, you wouldn't have had the same kind of interest as you do because of the budget and because of the fact that people are now getting more health care because nobody wanted to really look at expanding health care 25 years ago. So we were doing just the status quo, and people were not having health care. This legislature didn't really care that there were people out there without health care, did you know? Or that they were dying because they had no health care, just couldn't afford it. So all of a sudden now we want to see now an oversight when people are getting better health care. I don't have a problem with the oversight, but the joint budget, that's the joint budget's responsibility to do. I don't see the need for another layer of bureaucracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Smith.
For a question, Representative Leger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Who has oversight of the Medicaid program right now?
Well, when it comes to our department, obviously LDH has the immediate oversight.
So
from
health
CMS.
health and welfare?
Health and welfare hears much of this, yes, sir. And we hear, I think you know as well how much discussion we have in appropriations.
So appropriations, finance, health and welfare in the Senate, health and welfare in the House, joint budget, and now you're proposing this joint Medicaid oversight.
I think that what we will see is that, for example, I hope, and I can't project what any legislator might do any more than you can, Representative Leger, but I would assume that it would cut down on a variety of those issues in all of those committees because you have that point committee that handles this that we don't have now.
Does your resolution remove oversight authority from any of those committees and place it in this joint Medicaid committee? Or it just provides additional oversight?
It provides it with clarity.
So it provides additional oversight. It doesn't take away authority from any of those committees.
Obviously, this is a beginning of sorts with many states. And so I'm assuming, as I think you would, that as we advance this, I think that you would see some, not only suggestions, but I think you would see that we would not need certain things happening in other committees. That's the whole point. If not, then I think we would be just adding a layer for no reason. And that is not my intent at all.
But I'm not asking you a trick question. I'm asking you, does the resolution remove oversight authority from any of those?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so you add this additional oversight. You believe that over time, oversight responsibilities may shift more towards this oversight committee.
I think that would be healthy, yes, sir.
But there's nothing that says that oversight shall not continue at appropriations, finance, health and welfare, and joint budget.
That may be a future option that we have to take a look at, yes, sir.
And so, would you agree to provide some clarity in your resolution that would clearly remove oversight, or make some other kind of adjustment so that there is clarity? Because my fear is that we have people that get called before committees all the time, but they also have full-time administrative jobs where they're trying to implement policy. And my concern is that you just have perpetual committee meetings and oversight committees like we have in Washington. And I don't think we need that in Louisiana. I think we need to be very clear about who's got oversight authority and who doesn't, and that we don't stretch that any further than we need to.
Why don't, between here and the Senate, you help me with that, and I'll be glad to entertain that.
Would you consider an amendment that would limit this committee's meeting schedule, or the number of meetings in a given year, or the number of meetings in a month, or
I think you've asked two sides of the thing. So if we were removing all oversight, which again we haven't done today.
I want to be clear.
Others.
I'm not going to support removing oversight from appropriations, finance, joint budget, health and welfare.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out what your intent is, because Representative Smith asked some good questions about another level of bureaucracy. Right. You agreed that's not your intent.
Not intent.
But if what you're asking me to do is set up an oversight committee that eventually is going to take authority away from those substantive committees, then I can't support the bill. So I'm just trying to understand what you're trying to do with this.
Yeah, I thought that was your suggestion, that you would, I would like to see appropriations obviously you can't take away spending, but in our committee meetings, Representative Leger, we're not just talking about spending. We're talking about every aspect of what's going on.
Oh, I'm aware. I sit through those meetings.
As,
I
as
know.
well as I. And I think you know that most of the times we haven't missed those. We've been soldiers on this over the past 4 years. Would you agree? And so I think I see something that could be of a great assistance to all of us as legislators to do a better job. I don't want to take away from appropriations the opportunity to do the budgetary process that they're required to do.
Yeah,
but I don't
agree.
know that we're there to discuss every aspect of Medicaid, its expansion, and all of its fraud, and everything else that goes with that. And I do think that we could take a large level away from those committees, and they would all flow better. I think you would agree that that would be a great thing, is if it would remove some of those burdens, then I think that would be a healthy, good instrument that we could use as legislators.
I think that if there were a way to accomplish that, that would be a worthy goal. I'm not sure that you can accomplish that by creating an additional committee to have oversight. What I foresee is that this issue will continue to be fought about at the Appropriations Committee, the Finance Committee, the Health and Welfare Committees of both chambers, the Joint Committee on Medicaid Oversight, the the Joint Committee on Legislative Auditor, the Audit Advisory Committee, the Medicaid Fraud Task Force, and any number of other committees that tend to just keep bringing these issues for oversight purposes. And I'm concerned that this is just another. But I understand and I applaud you for making an effort.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Leger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members, could we refrain from throwing objects across the chamber, please? For a question, Representative Labar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I think I see where you're going to try to add less layers, but I'm afraid this is something that's going to add more layers. Because right now the legislature does have significant oversight of LDH through the Administrative Procedure Act, which I think is the big one that we have to operate under. And I'm really afraid that this is going to give maybe laws or rules that will conflict with each other. I really do, like Representative Leger said, that this would just maybe confuse things. Instead of speeding things up, I'm afraid this would slow it down as to who has authority in some of the issues that are being brought up. So the Health and Welfare Committee, of which I'm a member, can act as oversight for LDH under Title 49. So I think we have the people who deal with the issues on a regular basis in place to make these decisions and help. So I really think that all we're doing is just adding another layer and maybe can cause a log jam more than anything else. Did you know?
Thank you, Representative Labar.
For a question, Representative Cox.
I just want to know, I mean, aren't you for smaller government?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How much is this going to cost?
How much is this going to cost?
Yes.
Well, all of our folks are in place that do these tasks already. This is a reporting and an instrument to a committee.
Everything has a cost. Everything. And I'm just asking because you're going to have people do research. Will they be managing HMOs and PBOs?
Those
Will they be
issues are in place. Yes, sir.
Yeah, but that'll be part of this. My problem is that it's a good notion, but the problem is that we have things in place already in which you've heard talked about, and that if you wanted that to be done, maybe then you put additional requirements on the health and welfare, and that we do all this there. But to create another layer, which I'm quite sure you've always been against, because it's going to cost something to do this. That's all I'm saying, and you know, I think it's a delay thing. And what now? My question also is, did you know, what authority, what level, what are you going to do? What's going to be accomplished by this?
Well, it's in all areas, whether it's in reviews or planning or any particular thing that happens in Medicaid, which you recognize is a very complex area. And my point is that years ago, just like we have an education committee, it reviews all issues as it relates to education, and there are multiples of those things. Health and welfare has a variety of things they're responsible for. But I don't think anyone would have known years ago when we formed every committee that Medicaid would be such a large issue. And it has become a very mega issue. In fact, the figures point towards the direction nationally of $1 trillion in just a couple of years. So I think all legislators would want to do their very best to manage. This is not a good or bad thing, Representative Cox. This is not to hurt. This is only to help. This is to try to make certain that we do our very best for our constituents to provide the very best service we can. That's it.
I understand your intent, but it sounds like it's an audit or something. And you know how hard it is to do an audit?
This would include reviewing audits. We're already doing that. That's one of the things.
So how many days are you planning for a legislator to be down here to do this? Because to do it effectively, and trust me, I know it would take quite some time. So my question is how long would it take?
I don't think we know how long it would take, Representative Cox. We know
That's what
now.
I'm saying, and what we need to do is you want to put up more responsibility, I would ask, that you then coordinate with the chairman, who's very well capable of the Health and Welfare Committee, to make this happen. Now that, I think, is a scope that might be accomplishable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry.
For a question, Representative Morcell.
Yeah, I didn't know you.
Thank you. Representative Edmonds.
Yes, Representative Marcel.
Just a couple of questions, and I think some of the questions I had for you have already been asked, but just the first statement to establish the Joint Medicaid Oversight Committee.
Correct.
Is in itself kind of tells me that you're going to have oversight over whom? What authority are you going to have over the things that we already have in place? And how do people figure out who has the authority over what?
So we know the multiple divisions that the Louisiana Department of Health monitors in this particular area alone. And it's the most substantial of all of its areas. It requires the most time, monies, all of those things already.
And you don't think that the committees, the health and welfare committees and things we have in place is sufficient to handle that? Is that what you're saying?
I think we have evolved, Representative Marcel, and I think leadership evolves. We end up finding what a thing is. We couldn't have known this 30 years ago or 20 years ago. We have seen a change in how we do a thing. And I think good leadership responds. And I think that's what there's an attempt here to respond to what we see in government and our services of how we can use an instrument to do a better job.
Okay. Let's talk about the makeup of this committee. You said there's going to be 6 members from the Senate?
6 from each. 3 from the House Health and Welfare. 3 from the Appropriations.
Okay.
3 from Senate Finance. 3 from Senate Health and Welfare.
And would you agree that depending upon who's in leadership, what those committees might look like?
They will be appointed by the Speaker. They'll be appointed by the President of the Senate.
I understand. My question was, would you agree that depending on who the Speaker was, what that committee would look like?
I would say that if you look at current situation, which is all I'm privy to, I can't answer for every speaker and every Senate president, but I think if I looked at makeups right now of some Senate committees, for example, I would say that you
Can
see.
we just look at the regular committees we
I
have
think
set
you
up
look
right
at
now?
a parity on certain committees. I don't know that you're happy with every placement of every committee, Representative Marcel, but I can't answer for you. What might be in the mind of a speaker, I can't answer that question.
And depending upon who is the speaker or who's doing the appointment would certainly tell us what the makeup would look like. And then in the part 2 of page 1 says it is vital to prevent fraud and abuse committed by healthcare providers and so on and
That's
so
one
on.
particular
So-
major issue. Yes.
Right, and so depending upon what you believe to be abuse and fraud would be how that person would appoint those people is my concern.
This
That's
not
one
be
of them.
built around my particular view of what I believe is fraudulent. This would be what was built on data that's reported to an oversight committee, just like we do now. This
I
would
hear
not
you,
be
but
on-
I've seen some bills that have come before us, sir, that have suggested fraud in areas where I didn't see it as fraud. But, I mean, those are just some of the concerns that I have. And finally, we would be utilizing what staff, and how much would that cost us?
I do not have, they did not apply a fiscal note to this,
But there
Representative
has
Marcel.
to be a fiscal note, because if you have a committee, you're going to have staff and attorneys.
I think that you are looking at, and no one has looked at and said there's any additional staff necessary that I'm aware of.
You're saying additional staff. So when would this committee, because none of that's outlined for me, when would this committee meet? Because we do joint transportation right now.
That's correct.
And once they call that meeting, and they call it here, and the staff has to show up. But we don't do that on a frequent basis, right? So how frequently would this committee be meeting would be one determination of.
Right, so I can only answer and again, I can give you in the letter of the law, the special joint committee will have the power and authority of a standing committee or either house to hold hearings, require the production of books
You're going
and
to be
records.
conducting forums too. Where you going to conduct
So
those?
let me try to answer your previous question.
I'm sorry.
So we recently have formed a subcommittee on statutory dedications. That was passed by this House and Senate, and I've had the fortune of serving on that particular committee for the past 2 years.
Yes,
and
sir.
so it was a brand new situation. We were able to look at every statutory dedication, and we are reviewing them one by one by one. It was an additional responsibility that both the House and the Senate thought that was worthwhile, and our constituents thought that was worthwhile. We don't meet every month. We don't meet every day.
But it doesn't tell me how.
So we had
frequently.
to form ourselves. Then we had to see what the volume was, and then we laid out what we thought was a necessary meeting schedule in order to accomplish the mission that was set before the committee. So I'm saying to you, that's exactly what you would do. I cannot say to you today, we're going to meet once a month. We may not need to meet once a month.
Well, I understand, but did you know that you could form a committee of people that have like minds and meet regularly to, exchange ideas and what y'all think, and then bring that back to the committees that are already set up? That's A. And B, you certainly could conduct forums, because I do that without a committee right now, on whatever issue that I believe deemed is important to the citizens of Louisiana. So some of these things I think you can do without putting this additional layer on our government, and you may want to try it, but conferences and the things that I see listed here, organizing meetings and that kind of thing, and especially the forums that I see here, we can do that now without this resolution.
This legislature can do whatever it deems necessary to perform its duties. You
Yes,
are
sir.
correct. You can.
Yes, sir.
This, I believe, to be an excellent tool to be able to move us forward, not backwards.
Okay, thank you, Representative Edmonds. I
Thank
just
you.
want to give you some of my concerns.
For a question, Representative Dustin Miller.
Good morning, Representative.
Good morning.
Don't we have a Medicaid fraud task force? I think Representative Bacala.
And this bill is not about she asked a question about fraud. This bill is not about fraud just by itself. It could include fraud, but that is only one part of what an oversight group might do. I just referring to
I'm sorry,
Representative
I missed-
Marcel asked a question specifically about fraud.
So this committee, we're not going to focus on fraud?
No, I think you would focus on fraud. It's one of the issues in oversight that I think you well know that we're dealing with now, spending an enormous amount of time, of your time as a legislator right now, in appropriations. And some of those are not necessarily about the dollars that we spend, but it's about those issues. So this committee could take that issue, that one issue. It's not my proposition here that we take only fraud. That is not the point. But you can't eliminate that. That is a very large subject that you would look at. But that's not the only thing. There's all of these things. You know how complex Medicaid, I know you know how it is. I mean, you study it all the time.
I thank you for all your hard work too on this topic. But what in this committee is going to make a constituent healthier? Is this committee going to look at ways to make sure people have insurance and possibly increase the use of Medicaid?
It could.
But it's stated here, I see healthy living resulting in less use of Medicaid program.
It could do either. So if you're in true oversight, you're going to look at how can we provide better care? How can we work with a constituent that needs what if we're missing something that even our departments are missing? Is it possible? My answer is, to me, yes.
But
we're always trying to get better.
Am I correct when I say I don't think you've ever supported any initiatives to increase Medicaid access, right?
I would say that's incorrect.
Okay.
I think I have worked with the now waivers and
You're
disabled. In fact, I would consider myself a fighter for the elderly in those areas, adult health care services. So I think once we begin to think about where I have been on those, I think you've heard me speak multiple times.
And I stand corrected. You're right. You have. But recently here with the new system that we put in place, I think the first month 30,000, this month 40,000 recipients have been kicked off of Medicaid, and a lot of them is not because of over income. It's actually because they're not responding to the letters. What is this committee going to do? Or what are we doing, or what are you doing to make sure we get to those constituents to make sure that they can read the letter, they're well aware that they're removed off of Medicaid, so we can make sure they're getting insurance?
So in this particular case, I think in oversight, what would happen is we received an audit report, and then we would dig into where that was. I think what you would see is that if there were corrections, then this committee would be forefront to be able to speak to say, hey, what you just said, 30,000, many of them didn't respond to letters. It wasn't because of their income. And we would be reporting that back to this legislature and correcting issues. That would be a positive thing for Medicaid and not a negative thing. And so right now what happens is, especially when someone brings a bill like this, it's automatic as if you're trying to harm health care. I'm not trying to harm health care at all. I'm trying to assist to make certain that we have the best care in the state of Louisiana. We spend a lot of money doing it. We spend a lot of hours doing it. We have a lot of people involved in it. I think, Representative Miller, I think we're at about 1.6 million people involved. So when we talk about $1.6 million and $15 billion, I would think we owe it to ourselves to do this. I'm just the opposite. We ought to be anxious about doing a job to say, how can we move forward and do better?
And I hope you understand our concern is that 90% of the times we hear you talking about fraud, but we're never talking about how to make sure individuals who need the care is getting access. And that's our concern. That's the concern of the oversight. I know she asked about costs. What about per diem? Is this committee going to get per diem?
They could. It's not written in the bill. I don't remember writing that in the bill. Okay, they will get. I stand corrected. They would get it whether I wrote it or not. That would not be my choice. That would be a legislative practice.
So you would support an amendment for this committee to receive no per diem?
Would I? If that's the will of this body.
If we're trying
I don't
to save
know
the state,
I'd
we're
have to
trying to-
ask even, could we do such a thing? Okay, so it's up to the Speaker and the President, but by law, make sure I'm stating this correctly.
Law
So by law, members of the legislature can receive their per diem, but that, I'm assuming, then they could all void that opportunity if they just said they didn't want the per diem. Any legislator.
Members cannot. That's the thing.
But members cannot accept the per diem? Okay.
Compensation. It could be a constitutional issue. So
It is a constitutional issue of how members are paid their per diem.
for attendance
So
to the
for attendance to a body.
So members may get travel expenses and everything, et cetera. So does this HCR need a fiscal note?
This would, did not, as far as I know, no, Representative Miller, it did not need a fiscal note.
Is 12 members going to be on this committee?
6 each chamber.
Okay. So do you think the fiscal note may be 50,000?
I do not know.
Okay. So we're probably going to ask Butch for a fiscal note before we pass it. Now I'm going to wrap up. I guess my next question is, on Medicaid recipients, how many dollars actually go into the pocket of a constituent?
Hang on, would you wait a second? So I probably don't, heck, I don't want to do it in here. Yeah. I'm sorry, Representative Miller.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm back. So once again, I'll wrap up. My concern is just that, I represent a minority district who have a high poverty area, and we have individuals who need health care. We have individuals who we do not want to show up to the hospital and not have access to health care, not have access to treatments, and actually the state ended up paying more money when that individual should have had Medicaid and didn't. So I just, want to encourage you and just say let's continue to work on making this a healthier state by also fighting to make sure the individuals who qualify for Medicaid gets it, because I don't think that topic is talked about enough. Out of those 40,000 individuals who just got removed, I personally think probably at least half of them qualify, but either don't know how to respond. I know one of the questions on the application was to give access to your bank account. I think a lot of these individuals don't have banks, right? And out of fear, they don't respond. So I support getting rid of fraud, but I also ask that we advocate to make it a healthier state by giving individuals who need Medicaid and offer it to them.
And I don't disagree with that at all, Representative Miller. I think, again, back to my involvement with the development of the disabled, those that have behavioral issues. I've been in high support of adult care and everything you can think of down the line. Whenever you begin to frame how can we do a better job, what I would like to see is, along with what you would like to see, is I would like to see some reports that are positive. Committees have a lot of responsibilities, and sometimes all we hear is negative. That's just, I can't change human nature, but sometimes we can frame the discussion to where when good things are going on in our state, and oh, by the way, we do have some real good things going on in our state, and our people need to know when we have really positive things going on in our state. And I know this bill's not about me promoting the state of Louisiana, but
have you ever looked at, and I'm sure you have, but how we reimburse people for providing care? Do you think that's where the large budget is going, that certain people are getting reimbursed 200% above cost to treat a Medicaid patient? And if we actually would address some of those issues, instead of attacking the Medicaid recipient, that we probably would save money?
I would think, without asking you a question back, that oversight provides all of those things. That's what it does. So if there is over-collection, or as you're talking about particular fees, it's charges, or how CMS regulates, all of those things are...
I think the way we pay out for the care of that Medicaid patient is more of an issue than worrying about the Medicaid patient. But my last question, would you join me in finding ways, if I create and bring it to you, to fund some programs within DHH to make sure we increase in staff at their call center, so that when those Medicaid patients who are getting these letters, they're having a wait time sometimes of 60 minutes.
I would certainly welcome efficiency in every portion of government. If you'll explain to me how I can be a help to you, I certainly would welcome.
But I think
helping.
within the budget, we've left DHH with a $40 million hole to where they can't fund these extra positions. And now that we have the new automated system that's checking every quarterly, 4 times a year, a lot of people are getting removed off of the system. And when they call to answer, the call time is too long. A lot of these individuals have prepaid phone calls.
I welcome the discussion to answer your question.
So if they stay on hold for 60 minutes, that's 60 minutes off of their phone that's gone.
Yes, sir.
And also I don't think we did a good. And I'm getting off the mic. I'm sorry for taking. I'm
just
not
turn
going
it into a question, please.
All right, I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Miller.
For a question, Representative Stagney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Edmonds, I see you talk about fraud and abuse by healthcare providers and maybe people who got in the program. And I think we've passed bills off this floor looking at and needing to look at why our providers are being denied the ability to provide the care for pre-authorization services and why they've been denied after they provided the care when they've taken care of our residents. I think sometimes the words on the paper could be offensive, but this is happening across the country, but the focus has really been on those organizations who get capitated payments and who are supposed to be providing the money for our patients and to our providers for the care that they should receive. So I don't see that in your resolution. I'd like to see it. I think I'm a proponent of your resolution. I think it's a focus that we have to have. They're doing it across the country, but if we're going to budget that money for our patients, then we should make sure that that money is being provided to the providers on behalf of the care that they give to the patients.
Well, Representative Stagney,
did you know?
I am so thankful you should be at the well promoting this HCR. I'm glad you just did that because that's exactly one of the points of what oversight I believe would do. But what I do see, and my only experience that I can give you is that in appropriations, we begin some of these discussions and sometimes they become very lengthy, but they are tied to a budget. So my point is that instead of bogging down and continuing the direction we're going, where we're not getting these questions answered, that's exactly what this oversight committee would do. It would demand those kind of answers, help provide that kind of direction to where better care begins to occur. And that's my point. You made my point.
No, I agree. LDH, way back when, had a fee-for-service model. 9 years ago, they changed it to managed care. And really, for the last 3 years, it's been very difficult for that department to oversee this massive program. And I think we need to help them with some oversight and internal controls, and the system will work better, and it will weed out any fraud and abuse on anybody's part. But I think it needs to be reflected in the words of your resolution, because managed care organizations in other states, and I'm not saying that's happening here, but I will tell you we've passed bills off this floor unanimously almost to have more oversight. We need to strengthen that oversight. I like your resolution. I'm going to vote for it. I hope between here and the Senate, if it gets out of here, that you can put some words in that are more indicative of what we just talked about.
Thank you, Representative Stagney.
Thank you.
For a question, Representative Robert Johnson.
Hello? No, there it is. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Edmonds, I don't think there's a person in this body who doesn't want to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, but I'm trying to answer some questions for a constituent back home that's contacted me about this bill. And correct me if I'm getting something incorrect here, but in terms of the Health and Welfare Committee, they have oversight over the Medicaid program. Am I correct in that statement?
Yes, outside of course, appropriations works on the budgetary matters for LDH.
So appropriation shares in that oversight,
Correct.
and so does Senate Finance.
And Senate Health and Welfare. Yes, sir.
And in addition to that, the Speaker makes the appointments to the Committee of Health and Welfare,
That's correct.
and he also makes the appointments to Appropriations.
That is correct.
And the Senate President also makes the appointments to those Senate committees that have oversight.
I believe I followed normal procedure for these houses.
So basically, in your bill, you followed those exact procedures.
I believe I did. Yes, sir.
So basically, your bill follows the exact procedures that we have set up in the House for those committees that have oversight.
In the appointments. Yes.
In the appointments.
Yes.
So basically, we have oversight in this House over that program as it exists today.
We have the responsibility, as you had mentioned earlier, to those 4 committees.
Okay? So, and we get per diem for that oversight in those committees.
I only serve on one of those. I serve on appropriations, and the answer would be if we meet for appropriation matters, we receive per diem.
Because as a constituent, and my constituents asking me if we want to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, and we already getting paid to have that oversight on those committees with that same mechanism that we already have in place, and you're passing or asking us to vote on this bill to pass this bill, they're kind of asking me, and I can't disagree with them, why are we setting up the exact same mechanism for oversight? And the question is, are you trying to get extra per diem to do your job that you're already paid to do? It just seems like that's waste, fraud, and abuse. Isn't it? I can't help but argue with my constituent.
Well, you know, Representative Johnson, I've tried to work as hard as I possibly can as a legislator for now 11 straight sessions.
And I know you probably don't mean to do that,
Yeah. So.
but people back home are asking that question.
Right. Well.
And I can't help but argue with it. We have this exact procedure already, and that's our responsibility.
Well, I have a position on this because of the particular action that I have taken as an appropriations member of dealing with not just waste, fraud, and abuse, but the entirety of now what is becoming nationally one of the largest programs. Not saying it's good or bad. People try to put it in those situations of language. I'm not saying this is not for or against. This is an instrument.
And I get that.
That's all it is.
But when I go back home, I've got to answer to the people who sent me here, and they want to know why I'm coming back or voting for this when we have this in place and we're going to get paid extra for doing this when we're already getting paid to do it in the first place. So tell me, what do I tell them? Because they said, hey, this is waste.
I would say just the opposite. I would say that this is responsible leadership.
They're saying this is irresponsible.
Well, I'm sorry that
And
they think that
I
way.
can't argue with it. We already have this in place, and we're asking to do this again and get paid for what we're already doing.
This program, as well as all of these programs nationally, have grown at a rate that no legislator, governor, or leader could have imagined, not a good or a bad. This is the reality. We now have 1.6, almost 1.7 million people in the state of Louisiana that are involved in just one program. It is now encompassing almost all of our LDH budget, which now we know is in about $15 billion. So when asking how you manage a business or how you manage a particular organization, wouldn't it be prudent to think that you did your very best effort to begin to move forward to try to manage a thing that has grown, not a good or a bad, just a reality? We couldn't have known this, Representative Johnson. No one could have known the massive program that we are now attempting to manage. This is only a good government idea, not a bad government idea. and it only relieves what these committees are attempting to do. And I would even suggest that now we've had multiple task force and others that are attempting to just on the surface elements around this are trying to do. And I think you see that. I know you're well informed, and you see how many things we're forming as task force that are hundreds of pages long that we're trying to evaluate in order to make a competent decision. So it's quite an undertaking.
But the job and the mechanism is for these committees to do, and creating a committee to have oversight over the oversight is waste. And to report to the committee that has the oversight, it just seems you're trying to rid waste by creating waste.
Well, I disagree with that because I just believe of the volume of what you're talking about, and you're not considering that volume.
You set up the same mechanism we already have in place for oversight.
And I would say
with
that
the same, I mean, we have a committee on health and welfare. We have one on appropriations. The appointments are exactly the same mechanism that we have now, and the per diem is the same. Whether the budget grows or doesn't grow, we're cast with that responsibility to do that job, are we not?
Representative Johnson, just a minute. Representative Cruz, why do you rise?
Request 5-minute rule, please.
Is there any objection to adoption of the 5-minute rule? Representative Johnson objects. Members, Representative Cruz has moved for the 5-minute rule, to which Representative Johnson has objected.
Oh, thanks.
When the clerk opens the machines, if you're in favor of the 5-minute rule, vote yes. If you're opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Vote your machines, members. Are you through voting? Representative Miguez, yes. Representative Jordan, no. Representative White, yes. Representative J. Morris, yes. Are you through voting? Representative Lacombe, yes. Clerk will close the machine. 64 yeas, 26 nays, and the motion is adopted. We're under the 5-minute rule, members, which means there is 5 minutes left to discuss this topic. So, with this person, you can proceed. Y'all are both on. Continue.
I was just waiting for you. Do I need to repeat my question?
I'm sorry?
Repeat your question.
I'll repeat my question. I mean, I just need to be able to answer to my constituent that we're setting up the exact same mechanism that we already have in place now, and we're asking to be paid for it, and they think that's waste.
So ultimately, we hope to streamline what those committees are having to do, and this committee will take up that responsibility, and I think it will change over time, but I can't answer any of the rest of how
By
that
setting
might
up
occur.
oversight over the oversight we already have in
If that's
place
the way
and
you
getting
see it,
paid
Representative
twice for the
Johnson.
job that we already have to do.
Thank you, Representative Johnson.
Really, that's waste.
For a question, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Edmonds, do you agree with the decision that the governor made to accept the affordable health care for the state of Louisiana?
Whether it is the Affordable Care Act is a national act.
No. I'm asking the question, did you agree with the decision that the governor made to accept the affordable health care for the state of Louisiana?
And my answer is the Affordable Care Act has been passed by Congress. It's the law of the land.
But that's not what I asked you. It's a yes or no. You agree or you didn't agree?
He has to follow the law of the land.
So you agree with that, right?
If it's implementing the Affordable Care Act, that's the law of the land, if that's what you're asking me.
So I can say you saying yes.
It's the law of the land. Okay,
so you're saying yes. Okay. What is it? Can you tell me maybe 3 things that the Department of Health and Hospital is not doing right now as oversight in order for you to bring this instrument? Give me 3 things that they are not doing that you feel that there is a concern that this needs to be done.
I would say one of those is that the area of implementation of their particular responsibility of rules as they work through CMS rules that right now they're trying to implement them, but they're not to the point we would like them to be.
So you say they're not at the point where what? I couldn't hear you.
I would have to give you a couple of different rules.
You don't have to give me the rules. You just tell me those three things that is not being done right now. The reason why you think it's necessary to have a checker to check the checker. Why do you think that?
I think, number one, it's our responsibility. That's why we're elected. And we don't do that just for LDH. We do it for all agencies. That is our responsibility. We not only monitor their budgets, we monitor their policies, we monitor their implementation process.
That's not my question, though. You're telling me what we are doing. I'm asking you to tell me what is it that they're not doing that you think is necessary to bring this instrument, not what they already doing,
Right.
what they are not doing.
This bill is not, the question is framed in a negative manner.
My question?
Yes, ma'am. Because this bill assumes then that this bill exists to only fix negative problems, and that's not why it exists. We are an oversight legislator. That's what we are. That's what we do. That's the reason we have committees that you and I serve on, because we bring oversight to municipalities that you and I sit on, to hospitals. That's what we do.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you make mention of the fact that we need someone to check the checkers. Okay, we need someone to check the checkers who are already doing this. I'm asking you the question, what is it that they are not doing that you think is necessary for you to bring this instrument? I don't need to know what they already are doing.
I did not make the statement that we need to check the checkers. I never said that.
But you bringing this here to check the checkers, right? Because you said there needs to be more oversight. Oversight is someone checking somebody to make sure that they are doing what they are supposed to do.
That's
Am I
correct.
right?
That's correct.
Okay, so my question is, what are they not doing that you think we need to bring in more people to check the same thing that's already being done?
I believe that relates to the overload of what the committees are attempting to do.
Attempting?
To oversight, for oversight for this particular department.
Attempting to do, or they are doing, or they are not doing? Not attempting.
They're attempting to do it.
So they're not doing it?
Not fully.
Have you had an opportunity to talk to the secretary to share your concerns about what you're not seeing that you think you need to see? So that way we won't have to do a double on top of double as far as pre-diem. Because I heard one of my colleagues make reference to we're already paying pre-diem for the same thing that you're asking us to vote for and do. Right. So my question to you is, have you spoken with the secretary to make her aware, or make them aware of what really needs to be done that's not being done?
Representative Norton, the gentleman is out of time. We had 3 members left for questions. We have 3 members for the floor. Before we do that, members, I do need to take a break. Representative Leger and Bowie on personal privilege before we lose their guests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We have some special guests up in the balcony. First, we want to recognize over 100 students from St. Rita's Catholic School. If you could stand up, please. These are some very special students from New Orleans here to visit us today. And one of them is very special. Her name is Naomi, and she is Representative Bowie's granddaughter. So we want to welcome them. And Representative Bowie has an announcement to share with them that he and I are going to get some ice cream for you guys on us. So please go down to the cafeteria, and they're waiting for you with your ice cream. And while I got your attention, on the other side of the room, we also have a great group of students. So they could stand up and be recognized, the St. Stephen's School. And their principal, Rosie Kendrick. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the principal, Ms. Terrio, with St. Rita's. But also for the St. Stephen's students, we welcome you. And the cafeteria also has ice cream for you on me. So welcome to the Capitol, and thank you for being with us, to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome to the House of Representatives. Thank you for being with us. Enjoy your ice cream. For the floor on the bill, Representative Bacala.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I could have stood at my mic and asked a bunch of did you know questions, and I just don't really like did you know, so I thought I would take the mic and just say a couple brief words. Number one, the Medicaid Task Force on Fraud, Waste, and Abuse has been brought up many times in this conversation by several people. It's expiring. When I passed that resolution, I put a sunset on it. I knew it had a useful life and it didn't need to go beyond its useful life in August. Now I didn't bring any bill to extend it, but I think there are some people out there who are trying to extend it with amendments, so I don't want to, I haven't done those amendments myself. But the point is, the work that committee did is y'all have seen all the negatives out of that committee, but there's a lot of good that came out of that committee as well. We've had mom and pop pharmacies come in and talk about creating a single preferred drug list so they didn't have to stock extra drugs on their shelf. We've had home and health care people come in and talk about the difficulties they've had. We've had the mental health side come in. So there's most of what happened in that task force is not what you saw. Most of the topics you never heard of unless you bothered to read the report. Now, that is expiring. What's the next logical step? We've established that we were able to work collectively with all the agencies and create some new best practices within LDH. I'll say this, and I'll say it clearly. If we're not basing our decisions on accurate information, we're making bad decisions. And this task force that my seatmate seeks to create is about collecting information, not by one type of group like appropriations, but bring everybody into the room. Senate, House, the Finance, Appropriations, and the Health and Welfare Committee, so that we have all sides of the story, all sides of the decision makers in the same room, gaining information so that best decisions can be made. I will say it again as I began. I could have done all this as a did you know. I chose to come here, but I'm not here to answer questions on my seatmate's bill. I'm only here to say this. Let's keep the same group of people coming to the room, sitting together, working out how to make things work the best. Let's continue to examine what's done in other states so we can at least have some best practices on our desks. And I hope if this task force is created by a vote here, people like Dustin Miller will be on that committee, because I think he brings a lot to it. We don't need a one-sided committee. That's why that's why it's 6 and 6, 3 and 3 and 3 and 3. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will relinquish the mic.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Leger. On the resolution, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I certainly don't come to the mic to criticize the author of this resolution or Representative Bacala, who just came up here to speak in favor of it. But I do want to speak in support of the hardworking people at the Department of Health, because I have seen the oversight exercised by the Appropriations, Finance Committee, and Health and Welfare Committees. They bring a half a dozen to a dozen people from the Department of Health to answer all sorts of questions about the financial obligations and the performance of the Medicaid program. And that oversight is important. Representative Johnson spoke to the cost of creating this additional oversight committee and the duplication that could create. But let's also not forget the cost of dragging a dozen LDH employees before committee after committee after committee after committee to tell them, we think you're doing this wrong, we think you can do this better, we think you're doing a good job, we think that you've improved in this area, we want to work with you to make this better. Those are all great things, but at some point they also have to go do their job. And we do not need to get to a point where our agencies, whether it's the Department of Health or any other agency, has to hire people to come to committees to answer questions so that the administrators can go do their work. They have full-time jobs implementing complicated things. They work hard to do it. Do they always get it right? Of course not.
That's why we have oversight. That's why we have the Appropriations and Finance Committee. That's why we have the Health and Welfare Committee. But we cannot continue to pull people away and have them interrogated again and again and again, and then wonder the next day when they're called before another committee meeting why they haven't implemented the changes that we've suggested or the modifications that we think are necessary. So I don't like to come up here and say I disagree with an idea put forward by a member that I think is well-intentioned, but I have to express my frustration and belief that in order to have efficient government, there has to be a balance between that oversight and the ability of those agencies to go implement the recommendations made by that oversight. And so maybe we continue to talk about this, and I certainly think we continue to oversee the functions of the Medicaid program, but this just seems to me to be another step, another bureaucracy, and honestly, just another step towards constant hearings that we see in other places where nothing gets done, but we have hearing after hearing after hearing, day after day after day. I'd ask you to vote against this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Pugh. He waves. For the floor on the bill, Representative Norton.
To Mr. Speaker and to this body, I rise at this particular moment against this instrument. Representative Edmonds and I believe, are real good friends. We just sat down and had lunch the other day after the meeting for 15 or 20 minutes. I think there should be some changes made to many different things that we do here in this body, but not the things that are already working. If those things are already working, my concern is why are we changing something that's already working? I asked a question a few minutes ago to give me 3 things that was not being done, that needed to be done related to this instrument. I didn't get those 3 things, and I still don't have them. If I had got something tangible that would tell me that we need to do something different, then I can accept it. But I haven't gotten anything. I don't think we need checkers, checking the checkers. I think it's a waste of time to have someone checking that we already have checking. I just don't think it's fair. And being that I don't think it's fair, I've not heard in the last hour not one single reason why I should vote for this. I'm asking you all to look at what we have already going on, what's already happening. Up until now, we haven't heard not one single word about it not working. Until now. So evidently it must be working. Because if it had not been working up until now, we would have heard it. I'm asking you all. I have no answers on any questions that I asked. So I'm asking you all right now to vote against this bill. If you all want to pay double premium, and you think that's okay, but you're talking about saving at the same time, you need to rethink that. Again, thank you all for listening to me.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Robert Johnson.
Members, I know my friend Representative Edmonds does not mean to come and put forth a bill to try to get extra per diem. None of us would do such a thing. But our constituents are here to hold us in check. And the bill as written, that's exactly what it does. We already have mechanisms in place. Just like that bill reads, we have the oversight on these various committees. The appointment is made by the Speaker, and none of these committees have ever been denied any of that oversight. So to go ahead and pass a bill dealing with waste, or a resolution dealing with waste, or to combat waste by creating waste just doesn't make any sense. And therefore, the question my constituent posed to me, how do you prevent waste by creating more waste? And when you pose that question on this bill and you've got to answer it, it makes you think. It makes you think long and hard. And I think when you have to answer that question, I think you know how to vote, and you have to oppose this bill.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Bacala.
Mr. Speaker, I call the question.
There are no other members for the floor. Representative Edmonds, you have a right to close.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker and members. I think this is an opportunity for us to move forward. I don't know whether you'll want to do that today or not, but I do believe that this will be one of those things that states will do across the nation. Some are already doing, and I'd ask your favorable passage. Thank you.
Representative Edmonds has moved final adoption of the House resolution. All those in favor vote yes. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Vote your machines, members. Representative Dustin Miller, no. Representative Wright, yes. Representative Jordan, no. Representative Lacombe, no. Representative J. Morris, yes. Are you through voting? Representative Ivy, yes. Representative Moss, no. Are you through voting? Clerk will close the machine. Does the gentleman desire to give notice of reconsideration? He does. Before the notice, 52 yeas, 44 nays, and the resolution fails to pass.